I am Lisa, 33 years old, and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. As a highly successful private equity founder, I escaped their toxicity long ago, but I remained a silent observer of their lives. Today is my mother Brenda's 53rd birthday. Instead of a phone call or an invitation, I received a public notification. She tagged 50 of our relatives and her snooty country club friends in a vicious Facebook post. It read, "All my children brought this family respect, except Lisa. She chose to be a lowly single mom. She brings nothing but shame to our name. I no longer see her as my daughter." I did not cry. I simply picked up a black leather folder from my custom mahogany desk, took my 6-year-old son Leo by the hand, and drove directly to her exclusive birthday dinner. By the end of the night, she would be begging security not to throw her out on the street. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who severely underestimated your worth. Growing up in our affluent suburban county meant pretending our lives were flawless. But inside our walls, my mother cared infinitely more about country club waitlists and neighborhood gossip than her own children. 6 years ago, they threw me out into the freezing snow at 27 because I refused to terminate my pregnancy to save their pristine social reputation. They thought I was still that broken, desperate girl working a minimum wage job and scraping together pennies just to buy Leo a winter coat. They had absolutely no idea that for the past 6 years, I had quietly built Vanguard Holdings, a private equity firm that aggressively acquired commercial real estate across the state. I did not just have money. I had the kind of immense, untouchable wealth that made my mother's country club lifestyle look like absolute child's play. I sat perfectly still behind my desk on the top floor of my high-rise office in downtown Chicago. Through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights glittered brightly, creating a stark contrast to the dark, hateful words glowing on my phone screen. My sister Madison had commented a string of applauding emojis on the post. Her husband Jamal, an arrogant corporate lawyer who leased a luxury car just to look wealthier than he actually was, replied instantly. He wrote, "We fully support you, Brenda. Cutting out toxic, unsuccessful people is the only way to protect your peace." Jamal always loved using therapy buzzwords to justify his absolute cruelty. I locked my phone and looked down at the heavy black leather folder resting on my desk. Inside was a finalized deed of sale with fresh ink. It was exactly 6 o'clock in the evening. My mother's extravagant birthday dinner was starting right now at the Oak Ridge Country Club, the most exclusive establishment in our entire county. She had been on their wait list for 4 agonizing years just to get a basic membership, which was heavily subsidized by my father Richard and his rapidly dwindling retirement fund. Leo Buddy. I called out gently to my son, who was quietly drawing in the corner of my spacious office. "Put your warm coat on. We are going to Grandma's birthday party tonight." We pulled up to the Oak Ridge Country Club 20 minutes later in my custom matte black SUV. The valet rushed forward instantly, his eyes widening at the exclusive license plates, and he immediately opened the door for Leo and me. I held my son's hand tightly as we walked through the grand double doors. Our footsteps echoed with authority against the imported marble floors. I could hear the sharp clinking of crystal champagne glasses and loud, boastful laughter coming from the private dining room at the end of the long hallway. My heart beat a steady, calm rhythm. I was no longer the frightened girl they discarded like trash. I was the storm they never saw coming. As I pushed the heavy oak doors open, the room fell completely silent. 50 pairs of eyes snapped toward me in sheer shock. My mother, Brenda, stood proudly at the head of the table wearing a ridiculous diamond necklace, holding a glass of champagne high in the air for a toast. Her triumphant smile vanished instantly, replaced by a dark, furious scowl. Madison sneered in disgust, nudging Jamal, who let out a loud, mocking sigh and rolled his eyes. "What are you doing here?" Brenda's voice was like ice slicing sharply through the quiet room. I made it very clear online, Lisa. You are absolutely not welcome here. This dinner costs $200 a plate. I am not paying for you and your mistake. She glared viciously at Leo, who tightened his grip on my hand. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of fear. I simply walked right up to the head of the long table. I did not come to eat, Brenda. I came to deliver a message. Before anyone could even call for security, I raised the heavy black leather folder and slammed it directly into the center of her massive triple-tiered birthday cake. Vanilla frosting exploded everywhere, splattering all over Madison's silk dress and Jamal's expensive suit. "Watch where you are throwing your garbage!" Lisa Madison shrieked, frantically wiping the vanilla frosting off her overpriced designer dress. My sister looked absolutely unhinged, her perfectly curated country club aesthetic ruined in a matter of seconds. Beside her, Jamal was brushing cake off his custom-tailored suit jacket, his face twisted in utter contempt. Jamal stepped forward, using his broad shoulders to try and intimidate me. As a high-powered corporate attorney, he was used to bullying people into submission. He pointed a finger inches from my face. "You have crossed the line tonight, Lisa. Assault, trespassing, property damage. You will be lucky if they let you keep custody of that kid by the time I am done with you. I will personally see to it that you are locked up and your child is put in the system." I completely ignored him. I looked directly at my mother, who was staring in pure shock at the thick legal document ruining her extravagant cake. Her wealthy country club friends were whispering loudly among themselves, their eyes darting between my calm demeanor and Brenda's growing panic. This was her absolute worst nightmare unfolding in real time. Security. Brenda shrieked, her face turning an ugly shade of red. She waved her arms frantically toward the heavy oak doors. "Harris, get in here right now and do your job." Harris, the head of security, rushed into the dining room, followed by two burly guards. He was a tall, imposing man who had worked at Oak Ridge for over a decade. Brenda crossed her arms, a triumphant smirk spreading across her face as she looked down at me. "Take this trash out through the service elevator," Harris Brenda commanded, her voice dripping with absolute venom. "I do not want the other members seeing her. And call the police immediately. I want her arrested for trespassing." The guards approached me, but instead of grabbing my arms, Harris stopped dead in his tracks. He looked at me, his face draining of color, then stood up straight. He did not reach for his radio. He did not grab my arm. Instead, he bowed his head slightly in a deep show of respect. "Good evening, Ms. Lisa," Harris said loudly, his voice echoing in the silent room. "I apologize for the commotion. Is there a problem here?" Brenda dropped her champagne glass. It shattered against the marble floor, sending shards of crystal flying. "Ms. Lisa," she gasped, her voice trembling with rage. "Are you insane, Harris? Grab her. She is a broke single mother who snuck in here to ruin my birthday. I demand you throw her out right this second." Harris cleared his throat, looking incredibly uncomfortable but firmly standing his ground by my side. "Ma'am, I cannot remove Ms. Lisa. She is the owner." The entire room gasped. My father, Richard, finally looked up from his plate, his eyes bulging behind his glasses. Madison let out a strange, breathless gasp, her hands freezing mid-wipe on her ruined silk dress. "The owner of what?" Jamal scoffed, letting out a harsh, condescending laugh. "Her crappy leased apartment. She is a nobody, Brenda. Do not let this rent-a-cop fool you." I stepped forward and calmly reached into the center of the ruined cake. I pulled out the black leather folder, carefully wiping the thick vanilla frosting off the state seal printed on the front page. I held it up for my mother and Jamal to see clearly. "The owner of the Oak Ridge Country Club," I said smoothly. My voice was strictly business, carrying an authority that made the entire room freeze. "Vanguard Holdings finalized the acquisition of this entire estate at 4 o'clock this afternoon. I am Vanguard Holdings. I own the golf course, the tennis courts, the dining room, and the very chair you are currently sitting on." "Brenda." "You are lying," Brenda whispered. Her hands were shaking violently. She snatched the folder from me, smearing frosting across the pages as she frantically flipped through them. Her eyes scanned the legal jargon, the official state seals, and finally my signature on the bottom line next to the $12 million purchase price. All the blood rushed out of her face. She looked like she was going to pass out right there on the imported rug. Now I continued, keeping my tone perfectly level. As the new owner, I was reviewing the membership accounts this evening. It seems you, Richard, are 3 months behind on your annual dues. The previous management was incredibly lenient with you because of your long-standing history here. I am not. Your membership is permanently revoked, effective immediately. Jamal stepped forward again, his face burning with humiliation. You cannot do this, he hissed, trying to regain control of the room. You have no legal grounds to evict paying patrons without a 30-day notice. I will sue you for public defamation and breach of contract. You think you are untouchable because you got a little money. I looked up into his furious eyes and smiled. Check the bylaws of the club contract you bragged so much about signing, Jamal. Clause 4, Section B. Management reserves the right to terminate membership without notice for conduct unbecoming of the establishment. Screaming at the new owner in the dining room certainly qualifies. I turned to Harris. Clear the room. Anyone who is not out of this building in exactly 5 minutes will be charged with criminal trespassing. And Harris, make sure they use the service elevator. I do not want the other members seeing this trash. The silence in the dining room was shattered by a sudden ear-piercing wail from my mother. It was not a cry of sadness. It was the frantic, hyperventilating panic of a narcissist who had just lost her most prized possession. Her pristine public image. No, she screamed, grabbing the heavy mahogany table so hard her knuckles turned completely white. You cannot do this to me, Lisa. I am a founding board member of the charity committee here. My friends are in the next room. You are embarrassing me in front of everyone I know. I looked down at her without a single ounce of pity in my heart. You embarrassed yourself, Brenda. Now leave before I have you physically carried out in handcuffs in front of those same friends. Harris nodded firmly to his security team. 2 large guards stepped forward, placing their hands heavily on my parents' arms. Richard, my father, finally moved. He did not fight for his wife or demand respect from the staff. He just looked down at his expensive leather shoes, completely defeated, and let the guards steer him away toward the back hallway. It was the exact same cowardly posture he maintained 6 years ago when Brenda packed my bags and shoved me out the front door into a brutal winter blizzard. He was utterly useless then, and he was utterly useless now. My aunts and uncles, the very same people who had been laughing at my expense just moments before, were now scrambling out of their chairs in sheer panic. They grabbed their expensive winter coats and designer purses, rushing toward the main lobby exit with their heads bowed low. Not a single one of them wanted to make eye contact with me. Not a single one of them wanted to risk losing their own precious country club memberships by defending a woman who had just been publicly destroyed. Madison was crying hysterically as a tall guard gently but firmly pushed her toward the swinging kitchen doors. "This is not fair, Lisa," she sobbed loudly, holding her sticky frosting-stained silk dress away from her body. "You always ruin everything for us. You are an absolute monster." Jamal was the only one who actively fought back against the eviction. He violently jerked his broad shoulder away from the guard, trying to escort him. "Do not touch me!" he barked, his deep voice echoing off the high ceilings. "I know my rights as a citizen. You are making a massive legal mistake, Lisa. I will have this entire place shut down by the city. I will completely bury you in litigation until you have nothing left. Keep moving, sir," the guard ordered sternly, using his sheer size to force Jamal through the heavy doors. The polished elegance of the dining room faded away, instantly replaced by the harsh fluorescent lights and stainless steel counters of the commercial kitchen. The entire kitchen staff stopped working, staring in shock as the beautifully dressed family was marched through the grease and steam toward the dirty service elevator in the back alley. As the heavy metal doors of the freight elevator finally closed on my family, the dining room fell quiet again. I took a deep breath, feeling the heavy tension slowly leaving my shoulders. I knelt down to Leo, who had watched the entire chaotic scene with wide, observant eyes. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" I asked softly. He nodded, wrapping his little arms tightly around my neck. "You were really brave, Mommy," he whispered. I smiled warmly and kissed his forehead. Harris stood nearby, waiting respectfully with his hands behind his back. "Miss Lisa," he said gently, "the private dining room is fully cleared. Would you like me to have the executive chef prepare a fresh meal for you and your son?" "Not tonight, Harris," I replied, standing up and smoothing my skirt. "But I would like to see the security control room. I want to make sure they actually leave the premises without causing any damage to the property." "Right this way, ma'am," he said. He led us up a private, secure staircase to the second-floor surveillance office. Inside, a massive wall of high-definition monitors displayed every single angle of the sprawling estate. I stood comfortably in the warm, climate-controlled room, watching the pathetic aftermath of my mother's ruined birthday unfold in real time. On screen 4, the parking lot camera showed the family standing in the bitter cold Chicago wind. Brenda was pacing erratically near the valet stand, clutching her diamond necklace as if someone was going to steal it. She was aggressively typing on her smartphone, undoubtedly trying to draft a fabricated narrative to send to her neighborhood group chat before the terrible rumors could spread. Madison was shivering uncontrollably, yelling at the poor valet attendant who was struggling to locate Jamal's car keys. When Jamal's leased slate gray Porsche finally pulled up, he snatched the keys roughly, practically shoving the young attendant aside. But before getting into the driver's seat, Jamal stopped dead in his tracks. He turned slowly and looked directly up at the security camera mounted above the valet stand. He knew exactly where the lens was. Even through the grainy screen, I could feel the pure, unadulterated venom radiating from his eyes. He raised his hand, pointed a finger directly at the camera, and then deliberately mouthed the words, "I am taking your son." A cold chill ran down my spine. The immediate threat was gone, but Jamal was not making empty threats. My family would never accept this massive defeat gracefully. They were going to retaliate, and Jamal was going to weaponize his corporate law degree to aim for the only thing I cared about in this world. The real war had just begun. 3 days passed in total silence. No angry texts. No unhinged voicemails from Brenda demanding apologies. The quiet was actually much worse than the screaming because I knew exactly what it meant. Jamal was plotting his revenge. I was spending my Thursday afternoon at a modest single-story brick building on the gritty industrial outskirts of Chicago. It was a decoy mailroom office for Vanguard Holdings. In the aggressive, cutthroat world of commercial real estate acquisitions, you never use your primary headquarters address for public registry filings. This tiny drab space with its cheap, peeling laminate floors, flickering fluorescent overhead lights, and basic metal desks was designed strictly to process legal notices and receive angry mail from disgruntled property owners whom I had foreclosed on. I personally visited this location maybe twice a month just to collect the physical mail. Today I was here sorting through some mundane zoning permits. Suddenly, the flimsy front door rattled loudly against its hinges. Before I could even stand up, the door was shoved violently open, hitting the drywall with a sharp thud. Madison strutted into the small room, pulling her expensive designer winter coat tightly around her shoulders, as if the air inside the building was physically contaminating her. Jamal followed right behind her, ducking his head slightly to clear the low doorframe. He was dressed flawlessly in a pristine charcoal gray suit, carrying a high-end leather briefcase. He stopped in the center of the room and looked around the cramped, windowless space with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "So this is where the big bad real estate tycoon operates," Jamal sneered, his deep voice filling the small, hollow space. He kicked a stack of empty cardboard boxes out of his way with the toe of his polished leather shoe. "I have to admit, Lisa, when you pulled that ridiculous stunt at the country club, you actually had me going for a minute. You almost looked like a real player." But it did not take long for me to track down the registered public address for Vanguard Holdings. A dingy little storefront in the industrial district. Very impressive empire you have here. Madison let out a shrill, mocking laugh. She wiped a manicured finger across the top of a dented metal filing cabinet and grimaced at the imaginary dust. God, Lisa, this place smells like mold and cheap coffee. Is this really where you bring Leo after school? Are you sleeping on a cot in the back room? You blew whatever little high-interest loan you managed to scam out of a bank on a country club just to spite Mom, and now you are living and working in a literal dump. You are so pathetic. I sat back in my cheap, squeaky swivel chair and simply watched them. I did not say a word to correct their hilarious assumption. Let them think this was my entire world. Let them think they had cornered a desperate, overextended woman in a failing rented office. Their breathtaking arrogance was their greatest weakness, and I was going to let them dig their own graves as deep as they possibly could before I pushed them in. You are awfully quiet today, Jamal said, pacing slowly across the short length of the room like a predator trying to corner its prey. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, placing his hands on his hips to emphasize his broad frame and physical superiority. Where is all that tough talk from the other night? You see, Lisa, I ran a background check on you and this little shell company of yours. You bought a distressed asset. Congratulations on signing a massive mortgage you cannot afford. You do not have the liquid capital to maintain a country club, and you certainly do not have the legal firepower to handle what I am about to do to you. He leaned heavily over my metal desk, invading my personal space in a classic courtroom intimidation tactic. His expensive cologne was thick and suffocating. You humiliated my mother-in-law. You humiliated my wife. You threatened me in front of half the county. I am a senior partner at one of the top corporate firms in this city. I destroy people like you before my morning coffee. You played a stupid game and now you are going to pay the ultimate price. Madison leaned against the doorframe, crossing her arms with a vicious smirk. You really should have just stayed away, Lisa. You always were a massive disappointment, but this time you messed with the wrong people. Jamal has been working on something very special for you since the moment you kicked us out of that dining room. I looked at the heavy stack of papers, keeping my face entirely devoid of emotion. I knew exactly what kind of man Jamal was, but seeing his sheer entitlement up close was truly a spectacle. Jamal stood up straight and slammed his heavy leather briefcase directly onto my cheap laminate desk. The loud smack echoed sharply. He popped the golden latches, snapped the briefcase open, and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy watermarked paper. He tossed a sleek silver pen on top of the stack. "This is how this is going to work," Jamal said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, demanding tone. "I have drafted a legally binding agreement. You are going to pick up that pen and sign the bottom line right now, or I promise you I will make sure you lose everything you have ever loved." I stared at the thick stack of papers resting on my desk. The title at the top read, "Irrevocable Assignment of Trust Beneficiary." I kept my face entirely blank, masking the cold fury that was beginning to boil in my chest. "You want me to assign a trust, Jamal?" I asked, my voice calm and perfectly steady. "What trust are we even talking about?" Jamal leaned closer, his arrogant smile widening, exposing his perfectly whitened teeth. "Do not play stupid with me, Lisa. I am talking about the educational trust fund Grandpa Theodore set up for Leo right before he died. Theodore was a fool to leave $50,000 to an illegitimate child, but that money has been sitting in an escrow account gathering interest for 6 years. I want it. I want you to sign over your custodial rights to that account to me immediately." I raised an eyebrow, genuinely amused by his desperation. "You want my 6-year-old son's college fund? I thought you were a highly successful corporate attorney, Jamal. Why on earth would a senior partner who drives a brand new luxury vehicle need to steal $50,000 from a child?" Jamal's face darkened instantly. A quick flash of genuine panic broke through his polished, arrogant veneer. "My private practice is going through a temporary liquidity transition," he snapped defensively, aggressively adjusting his silk tie. The firm requires a substantial capital injection to secure a new suite of offices downtown. Consider this a penalty fee for the ridiculous stunt you pulled at the country club. You owe my family for the emotional distress you caused Brenda. Now pick up the pen and sign the paper. And if I refuse, I ask, leaning back in my squeaky swivel chair and crossing my arms. Jamal laughed. It was a cold, calculating, and deeply cruel sound. Then I make a phone call. I know 2 presiding judges and 3 regional directors at the state family court system. If you do not sign that paper right now, I will personally file an emergency petition with Child Protective Services. I will tell them that you are an unstable, vindictive woman, living in absolute squalor. He gestured broadly around the cramped peeling office, kicking the metal trash can for emphasis. I will take photos of this dump and tell the state investigator that this is where my poor nephew sleeps every night. I will say you are hoarding garbage, that you are verbally abusive, and that you exhibit signs of severe paranoia. Who do you think they are going to believe, Lisa? A respected, high-powered corporate attorney with a pristine public record, or a bitter single mother working out of a condemned building? My blood ran completely cold, not out of fear, but out of pure disbelief at his sheer audacity. He was actively threatening to weaponize the child welfare system to extort a child's inheritance. He was willing to traumatize my innocent son just to fund his failing law firm and keep up his wealthy appearances. They will come to Leo's school unannounced. Jamal continued, clearly enjoying the power trip, as he leaned closer to my face. They will pull him out of his kindergarten class. They will question him alone. They will put him in a temporary foster home while the investigation drags on for months. I know exactly how to manipulate the legal system to ensure you do not see your son until the formal court date. By the time the judge realizes the claims are exaggerated, the damage will be completely done. You will be bankrupted by legal fees just trying to get him back. He tapped the heavy silver pen loudly against the desk. Or you can sign the paper. You give me the trust fund, and I walk out of here and leave you to rot in your pathetic little life. It is your choice, Lisa. Your money or your kid. I looked at him, absorbing every single syllable of his vile extortion attempt. It was textbook blackmail. It was a massive career-ending felony. And he was arrogant enough to say it all out loud in a room he had not even bothered to secure. He truly believed I was utterly powerless. Madison pushed herself off the doorframe and strutted over to the desk, standing shoulder to shoulder with her husband. She looked down at me with a sickeningly sweet smile, her eyes glittering with deep malice. "You should just sign it, Lisa," she said smoothly. "It is not like you deserve to have a kid anyway. You have been a terrible mother since the very day that boy was born. Honestly, CPS taking him away would probably be doing the kid a massive favor. After all, we both know exactly what kind of mother you really are." Madison leaned over the desk, her manicured nails tapping aggressively against the cheap laminate. "Remember that cold night 6 years ago, Lisa? It was 20 degrees outside in the dead of winter. Mom locked the heavy oak front door right in your face because you refused to go to the clinic and fix your little mistake. You stood on the porch, crying 8 months pregnant, begging to be let inside the house. And you know what the absolute funniest part was? I was standing right there in the warm hallway wearing your favorite heavy wool winter coat. You were freezing, and I just watched you shiver through the glass window until you finally gave up and walked down the dark driveway into the blizzard. If you could not even secure a warm coat for yourself that night, how could you possibly be fit to raise a child now? I listened to my sister recount the darkest, most terrifying night of my entire life. I remembered the biting cold slicing through my thin sweater. I remembered the sheer terror of having absolutely nowhere to go, holding my swollen stomach, praying my unborn baby would survive the freezing wind. That night broke me into a million pieces. But the woman sitting in this chair today was forged from those exact pieces. I was no longer the frightened victim they could push around. Instead of crying, instead of breaking down like they eagerly expected, I simply smiled. It was a slow, genuinely amused smile that reached all the way to my eyes. Madison frowned, her arrogant expression faltering for a split second. "What are you smiling at, you psycho?" I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk, looking back and forth between the two of them. "I just want to make absolutely sure I understand the precise terms of this incredible deal you are offering me," I said, keeping my tone light and conversational. "Let me get this straight. You, Jamal, a senior partner at a prestigious corporate law firm, are actively demanding that I sign over my son's $50,000 trust fund directly to you." "That is correct," Jamal said sharply, crossing his thick arms over his chest. "And you are going to do it right now." And if I refuse to sign this document, I continued clarifying the details with extreme care. "You are going to intentionally fabricate evidence. You are going to use your professional credentials and connections with presiding judges to file a completely false report with Child Protective Services. You plan to commit perjury, defraud the state family court system, and forcibly remove my child from my custody, all to secure capital for your failing private practice. Is that your official legal strategy?" Jamal let out a loud, booming laugh, completely oblivious to the massive trap he was walking right into. "It is not perjury if they believe me, Lisa. And they will definitely believe me. Look at me. I wear a $5,000 custom suit. I belong to the elite state bar association. You are a nobody working in a condemned dump. I can draft a sworn affidavit by noon tomorrow stating you have a severe substance abuse problem and a long history of violent, unpredictable outbursts. I will have a state social worker at your kid's school before the lunch bell even rings. I will bury you so deep in legal paperwork you will never see daylight, let alone your son, ever again. Do not test me. I am utterly untouchable in a courtroom." Madison smirked, clearly thrilled by her husband's ruthless display of absolute power. "Just sign the paper, Lisa. Take the loss like you always do. We will take the money, and we will not call CPS to take Leo away. It is a win for everyone involved." I looked at Jamal, studying his smug, arrogant face. "You are really confident in this extortion plan, Jamal. You really think you can just walk right into my office, blackmail me for a child's inheritance, threaten me with fabricated federal charges, and face absolutely zero legal consequences?" "I know I can," Jamal sneered, leaning down so his face was merely inches from mine. "Because you are weak, Lisa. You have always been weak. Now pick up the pen and sign the damn paper before I lose my patience." My smile vanished completely, replaced by a look of cold, calculating precision. I did not reach for the expensive silver pen sitting on top of the blackmail document. Instead, I slowly lowered my right hand under the edge of my desk. I had not been sitting here cowering in fear. I had been sitting here letting them talk. I had been actively baiting them, giving them enough rope to hang themselves completely. My fingers brushed against the small, cold metal device I had secured under the desk the moment they walked through the door. I pulled the small device from its hidden magnetic mount underneath the desk and placed it gently in the center of the table right next to his ridiculous extortion document. It was a military-grade digital voice recorder. The tiny red recording light blinked steadily, an undeniable testament to the massive trap he had just walked blindly into. Jamal stopped breathing. His dark eyes locked onto the blinking red light. For a man who made his living manipulating words in a courtroom, he suddenly seemed entirely incapable of finding any. I reached forward and pressed the playback button. The tiny speaker was incredibly powerful. Jamal's own voice filled the cramped office with crystal-clear precision. "I will personally file an emergency petition with Child Protective Services. I will tell them that you are an unstable, vindictive woman living in absolute squalor." I let the recording play as his voice continued outlining his detailed plan to commit perjury, fabricate evidence, and traumatize my 6-year-old son just to steal $50,000. Then came Madison's voice, cruel and taunting, suggesting that my child being taken away would be a massive favor because I was a terrible mother. I pressed pause. The silence that followed was completely deafening. The arrogant swagger Jamal had brought into my office completely evaporated. All the rich color drained from his face, leaving an ashen, terrified expression behind. Madison took a stumbling step back, her hands flying up to cover her mouth in sheer horror. She finally realized that her cruel taunting had just made her an accessory to a major felony extortion plot. "You did not think I would actually meet with a hostile corporate attorney without documenting the conversation, did you, Jamal?" I asked quietly, leaning back in my squeaky chair. "You came into my place of business. You demanded a child's trust fund. You explicitly threatened to defraud the state welfare system and commit perjury if I did not comply. This is not just a simple family misunderstanding. This is textbook criminal extortion. And you delivered the entire confession flawlessly on tape." Jamal swallowed hard. His expensive custom-tailored suit suddenly looked like a suffocating straitjacket. "Lisa," he stammered, his deep, authoritative courtroom voice cracking into a pathetic, desperate whine. "Listen to me. That was just an aggressive negotiation tactic. I was never actually going to call anyone. We are family. I was just trying to show you how serious our financial situation is right now. You cannot use that recording anywhere. It is totally inadmissible. Illinois is a two-party consent state for audio recordings. You just broke the law by recording me without my permission." I laughed softly, shaking my head at his desperate attempt to regain control. "You are a terrible lawyer, Jamal. Illinois is indeed a two-party consent state for private conversations. However, the law clearly states there is absolutely no reasonable expectation of privacy when you are actively committing a felony extortion attempt in a commercial business space. Furthermore, there is a very visible legally compliant sign on the front door you just kicked open stating this premises is under constant audio and visual surveillance for security purposes. This recording is absolutely admissible in a court of law. But honestly, the police are the least of your immediate worries." His eyes darted frantically around the room, searching for an exit, searching for an excuse, searching for anything to save his prestigious career. "What are you going to do?" he asked, his voice barely a terrified whisper. "I am going to send this crystal-clear audio file directly to the State Bar Association Ethics Committee," I said, leaning forward and staring right into his panicked eyes. "I am going to attach a formal grievance detailing how one of their prestigious senior partners actively attempted to extort a single mother by weaponizing the child welfare system. They will suspend your license to practice law before the sun even sets today. Your firm will fire you immediately to avoid the massive public relations nightmare. You will lose your high income, your leased luxury car, your carefully crafted reputation, and eventually your freedom." The crushing reality of his total destruction finally hit him. The logic in the law had utterly failed him. He had absolutely no leverage left. In a split second, his sheer panic violently mutated into blind, desperate rage. He let out a loud, primal yell and lunged his massive frame across my desk. His hands swiped aggressively at the voice recorder, knocking his own thick legal documents to the floor. He thought he could just take it by physical force. He thought he was the strongest person in the room. He was completely wrong. Before Jamal's fingers could even graze the metal casing of the recorder, the heavy door to the back supply room swung violently open. Two massive men dressed in dark tactical suits stepped into the office. They were my private executive's security team, and they had been listening to the entire conversation through earpieces. The lead guard lunged forward, grabbing Jamal by the collar of his $5,000 custom suit. With one fluid, brutal motion, the guard ripped Jamal right off the desk and hurled him backward. Jamal slammed hard onto the cheap laminate floor, gasping for air as the second guard pinned his arms aggressively behind his back. Jamal let out a pathetic wheeze as the heavy knee of my executive security guard pressed firmly between his shoulder blades. Madison screamed a shrill and piercing sound that bounced harshly off the thin drywall of the small office. "Let him go!" she shrieked, rushing forward with her designer purse swinging wildly. The first guard simply raised a heavy hand, stopping her dead in her tracks with a single stern look. "Do not take another step, ma'am," he warned, his voice low and incredibly commanding. I stood up from my squeaky swivel chair and walked slowly around the desk. I looked down at Jamal, whose perfectly polished face was now pressed awkwardly against the cheap laminate floor. His custom suit was completely wrinkled, his expensive silk tie thrown haphazardly over his shoulder. He looked exactly like what he truly was underneath all that arrogant corporate posturing. A weak, desperate, and pathetic bully who had finally picked a fight with the wrong person. Escort them off the property, I told my guards, calmly keeping my distance from his flailing legs. If they resist or cause a scene in the parking lot, call the local precinct and have them formally arrested for trespassing and assault. But frankly, I think Jamal has had enough legal trouble for one afternoon. The guards grabbed Jamal's arms and hauled him roughly to his feet. He was completely silent now. The aggressive courtroom fight had been entirely knocked out of him. His dark eyes darted nervously to the small digital voice recorder still resting prominently on my desk, its red light blinking like a steady, terrifying heartbeat. Madison grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the open door, her face pale with absolute terror. They stumbled out into the cold industrial hallway, their hurried footsteps echoing loudly as they fled the building in complete disgrace. The heavy door clicked shut behind them, leaving the office perfectly quiet, once again. I sat back down at my desk and picked up the voice recorder. I could have called the police right then and there. I could have handed the audio file to a local detective and let the criminal justice system slowly process the extortion charge. But the criminal system is notoriously slow, and Jamal was a wealthy corporate lawyer who knew exactly how to delay hearings, file endless motions, and manipulate the bail system. I did not want him waiting comfortably in his luxury home while the state spent months building a case against him. I wanted to strike directly at the very core of his arrogance. I wanted to completely dismantle his livelihood. I wanted to take away his ability to ever threaten another human being with his professional credentials again. I opened my laptop and navigated directly to the official website of the Illinois State Bar Association. I clicked on the portal for filing a formal attorney grievance. I typed his full legal name and his bar license number, which I had memorized from the extensive background check my team ran earlier that week. I began to type the narrative of the complaint. I did not use emotional language or angry accusations. I used cold, hard, undeniable facts. I detailed the precise time and location of the incident. I explicitly cited the Illinois Rules of Professional Conduct that he had flagrantly violated. I noted Rule 8.4 regarding professional misconduct, specifically highlighting his brazen attempt to commit extortion and his explicit threat to present false administrative charges to Child Protective Services solely to obtain an advantage in a civil financial matter. I described his explicit demand for my 6-year-old son's $50,000 trust fund in exchange for his silence. Every single keystroke felt like a heavy brick being removed from my chest. For years, my family had used their perceived status to make me feel small and powerless. Jamal had strutted into my office, completely convinced that his law degree made him a god among men. He thought he could weaponize the child welfare system to tear my family apart for his own financial gain. He was about to learn that the law was a double-edged sword, and he had just handed me the hilt. I connected the digital voice recorder to my laptop via a small cable. I extracted the high-definition audio file completely unedited and attached it directly to the digital grievance form. I added a brief note emphasizing that the recording was obtained legally within a commercial premises, clearly marked with mandatory surveillance notices. There would be absolutely no loopholes for him to exploit. The evidence was irrefutable. His own arrogant voice would be the instrument of his total professional destruction. I reviewed the complaint one final time, ensuring every detail was perfectly accurate and every legal citation was correct. Then, without a single ounce of hesitation, I moved my cursor over the submit button and clicked send. A green confirmation banner appeared across the top of the screen notifying me that the Ethics Committee had officially received the filing. The first massive domino had just been pushed. But I was not finished securing my perimeter. I picked up my cell phone and dialed the private number of my own elite legal team in downtown Chicago. When my lead attorney answered, I did not waste any time with pleasantries. I need a comprehensive emergency restraining order filed against my brother-in-law and my sister immediately, I instructed coldly. They made explicit threats against my custody of Leo today. I want them legally barred from coming anywhere near my home, my offices, and most importantly, Leo's elementary school. Have the paperwork ready for a judge by morning. The next morning, at exactly 9 o'clock, Jamal walked into the grand glass lobby of his downtown corporate law firm. He was carrying his expensive leather briefcase, acting as though the humiliating physical ejection from my office had never happened. He smoothed his custom silk tie and barked orders at a young paralegal who did not move out of his way fast enough. Jamal thrived on this high-pressure environment. Here, surrounded by mahogany conference tables and junior associates who feared his aggressive tactics, he felt like an absolute king. He walked confidently toward the main conference room where the senior managing partners were gathering for their weekly strategy meeting. Jamal was fully expecting to lead the morning discussion on a major upcoming corporate merger. He poured himself a cup of premium dark roast coffee and took his seat at the head of the long table, flashing his signature arrogant smile at the older partners. But before he could even open his mouth to speak, the heavy glass doors of the conference room swung open. A stern-looking woman in a sharp gray suit walked directly into the room, followed closely by the law firm's human resources director. The woman bypassed the junior lawyers and walked straight up to Jamal. She slammed a thick manila envelope onto the polished mahogany table right in front of him. Jamal stared at the heavy envelope, his confident smile faltering. "Excuse me," he snapped, using his deep, authoritative courtroom voice. "We are in the middle of a private partners meeting. Who let you in here?" The woman did not flinch. "Jamal," she said loudly, making absolutely sure every single person in the room could hear her clear voice. "I am an official investigator with the Illinois State Bar Association Office of Disciplinary Counsel. You are hereby served with an emergency subpoena and a formal notice of immediate license suspension pending a full ethics review." The entire conference room erupted into shocked whispers. The senior managing partner, an older man with absolutely zero tolerance for public scandal, stood up abruptly. "What is the meaning of this?" The senior partner demanded, his face turning bright red with anger. "What exactly is the nature of this sudden grievance?" Jamal scrambled to grab the envelope, his hands shaking violently as he tried to hide the official state seals. "Sir, it is a complete misunderstanding," Jamal pleaded, his voice cracking under the intense scrutiny of his bosses. "A vindictive family member is making completely baseless accusations against me. I can clear this entire situation up by noon today." The investigator ignored Jamal's desperate lies and looked directly at the senior partner. "We received an undeniable crystal-clear audio recording of this man attempting to extort $50,000 from a single mother. The recording explicitly details his plan to fabricate evidence and file a fraudulent report with Child Protective Services simply to steal a child's trust fund. Given the extreme severity of these criminal threats, his license to practice law in the state of Illinois has been suspended, effective immediately." The color drained completely from Jamal's face. He looked around the large room, making eye contact with the junior associates he had mercilessly bullied for years. Not a single one of them looked sorry for him. The senior partner slammed his heavy fist on the table. "Extortion," the older man bellowed. "You used your professional credentials at my firm to threaten to take away a child. Get out of my building right now, Jamal. You are suspended without pay indefinitely. Leave your company laptop, your corporate credit card, and your security badge on the table. Security will escort you out of the lobby." Jamal tried to argue, but the human resources director stepped forward, signaling for the building guards. Within 5 minutes, the high-powered, arrogant corporate lawyer was publicly stripped of his badge and marched out of the glass lobby, in front of his entire staff, carrying his personal belongings in a small cardboard box. When Jamal returned to his expensive rented townhouse that afternoon, he found Madison browsing luxury vacation packages on her tablet. He dropped the cardboard box onto the kitchen counter with a heavy thud. Madison looked up, annoyed by the loud interruption, until she saw the utterly devastated look on his face. "What happened?" Madison asked, her voice tight with sudden panic. Jamal sank into a bar stool and buried his face in his hands. He confessed everything. He told her about this bar association complaint, the undeniable audio recording I submitted, and the terrifying fact that he was suspended without pay. Madison's jaw dropped open. "What do you mean without pay?" she shrieked, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the edge of the marble island. "Jamal, the lease payment on the Porsche is due next week. We maxed out our credit cards to pay for your custom suits. We have absolutely no savings. How are we supposed to survive?" Jamal had no answers. He just sat there, a completely broken and defeated man. Madison snatched her cell phone from the counter and immediately dialed our mother. When Brenda answered, Madison burst into hysterical tears, painting a completely twisted version of reality, where I was a cruel monster trying to destroy their perfect marriage. Through the phone, Brenda's voice shook with pure venom. She actually reported my golden son-in-law to the state bar over a simple family disagreement, Brenda hissed angrily. "She wants to play dirty. Fine. I will absolutely destroy her life in this community. By the time I am done with her, no one in this county will ever look at Lisa the same way again." The very next morning, my cell phone rang while I was pouring myself a cup of coffee in my kitchen. The caller ID displayed my father's name. Richard had not called me directly in over 6 years. Whenever there was a family issue, Brenda was the one who barked orders, while he stood silently in the background staring at his shoes. I knew exactly what this was. Brenda was playing the role of the vicious attack dog in the community, and Richard was being sent in to play the gentle peacemaker. It was classic good cop, bad cop manipulation. I accepted the call and put it on speakerphone, setting it down on the granite counter next to my laptop. "Hello, Richard," I said evenly, taking a sip of my dark roast coffee. "Lisa, sweetheart?" His voice came through the speaker, sounding exhausted and remarkably fragile. "Please do not hang up. I just want to talk to my daughter." "Can we just talk like a normal family for a few minutes?" "We are not a normal family," I replied coldly. "And I am only giving you exactly 3 minutes to say whatever Brenda forced you to say." He let out a heavy sigh, trying to project a tone of deep paternal sorrow. "Your mother did not force me to call Lisa. I called because my heart is breaking. I am watching my family tear itself apart, and I cannot bear it anymore. You have made your point. You showed us all how successful you are, and I am genuinely proud of you. But what you did to Jamal yesterday is going too far. You are destroying a man's entire career over a silly misunderstanding." "A silly misunderstanding," I repeated, feeling a sharp spike of cold anger. Jamal did not accidentally bump into my car. He came into my private office and explicitly threatened to fabricate evidence to have my 6-year-old son taken away by the state. He tried to extort a $50,000 trust fund from a child. There is audio proof of him committing a major felony. That is not a misunderstanding, Richard. That is a premeditated crime. He was just blowing off steam. Richard pleaded, his voice taking on that familiar whining quality he always used when avoiding any real conflict. "You know how Jamal gets when he is stressed. He has a lot of pressure at work. He would never actually hurt Leo. You are taking things way too personally. We are blood, Lisa. Blood forgives each other. Please, I am begging you as your father. Call the State Bar Association right now and drop the ethics complaint. Tell them you overreacted and manipulated the recording." I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter so tightly my knuckles turned white. For 27 years I had craved my father's protection. I had waited for him to stand up for me, to tell my mother she was wrong, to be the shield I desperately needed. Now the only time he was willing to step up and beg was to save the arrogant man who married his golden child. "Do not dare call yourself my father," I stated, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Where was this desperate pleading when Brenda changed the locks on the front door in the middle of a winter blizzard? Where was your paternal love when I was standing on the porch 8 months pregnant, crying and shivering in the snow? You stood right there in the hallway. You looked at me through the glass window, and then you turned your back and walked into the living room because you were too cowardly to disagree with your wife. You did not protect me then. And you stood silently at the country club while they tried to have me thrown out. You are a coward, Richard. You only care about keeping the peace, so you do not have to deal with Brenda's yelling. Lisa, please, you do not understand the pressure we are under. He stammered, his carefully constructed peacemaker facade beginning to crack under the weight of the undeniable truth. You survived. You did well for yourself. But Madison and Jamal need this. Jamal has to go back to work. You have to drop the complaint today. If he gets disbarred, his entire life is over, and Madison will be ruined. Why do you care so much about his paycheck? I pushed back, refusing to let him off the hook. He is a grown man. He can figure out his own financial mess. Why is my father begging for a man who leases a luxury Porsche and buys custom suits? Because if he loses his job, we lose the house. Richard blurted out, his voice cracking in sheer panic. The line went completely dead silent. I stopped breathing for a second. What did you just say? I asked softly. Richard let out a choked sob, realizing the massive mistake he had just made. He had cracked under the intense pressure of my logic. The dark, humiliating family secret was finally out. Lisa. I am so sorry, he cried. Jamal needed capital to make senior partner and start his own private firm. Your mother and I took out a massive second mortgage on our house to pay for his firm and that stupid car. We bet everything we had on him. I stared at the phone sitting on the granite counter, completely stunned by the sheer magnitude of their financial stupidity. You mortgaged your fully paid-off house, I asked, my voice dropping an octave as I made sure I heard him correctly. The house I grew up in. The very house you threw me out of because I was supposedly a financial burden. You risked your entire retirement fund to finance a luxury lifestyle for an arrogant man who is not even your blood. Richard was openly weeping now, the pathetic sound echoing loudly through the speaker. He promised he would pay us back with interest, Lisa. He explained that corporate law is all about appearances and projecting success. He needed the luxury Porsche and the expensive custom suits to attract high-net-worth clients to his firm. He needed the massive capital injection to secure his senior partnership and eventually launch his own private firm. Your mother insisted it was a brilliant investment. She said Jamal and Madison were going to take care of us in our old age. But the balloon payments on the second mortgage are due at the end of next month. If Jamal loses his salary and his law license, we will completely default. The bank will foreclose on the house. You have to save us, Lisa. You have to call the Bar Association right now. I felt a sickening wave of absolute disgust wash over me. For years, Brenda had paraded Madison and Jamal around the wealthy neighborhood as the ultimate success story. She had posted endless photos of their expensive vacations and Jamal's leased luxury car, using their fake wealth to publicly humiliate me at every possible opportunity. And the entire time it was all a massive house of cards built firmly on my parents' rapidly draining equity. They had literally bankrupted themselves to buy a golden child narrative for the neighbors to admire. Let me get this completely straight, I said, my voice hardening into absolute ice. You and Brenda watched me struggle to buy basic baby formula. You watched me work exhausting night shifts while pregnant. You told the entire extended family I was a worthless failure who made terrible life choices. But behind closed doors, you were secretly funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars to a grown man so he could pretend to be a rich hotshot lawyer. We made a terrible mistake, Richard sobbed, ignoring my completely valid points. Please, Lisa. You are wealthy now. You own an entire country club. You clearly do not need this revenge. Be the bigger person. Do not make your own mother and father homeless over a stupid argument. I am not taking your home, Richard, I replied firmly, refusing to let him manipulate the narrative. Jamal took your home the exact second he decided to walk into my office and commit felony extortion. I did not force him to threaten my child. I did not force him to break the law. And I certainly did not force you to sign a second mortgage for a con artist. You and Brenda made your choices. Now you get to live out the severe consequences of your toxic enabling. I will never drop the charges. Jamal belongs in a jail cell, and if you lose your house because you funded a criminal, that is entirely your problem. The pathetic weeping on the other end of the line stopped instantly. The fragile, desperate peacemaker facade vanished completely, replaced by the same toxic, cowardly man who had watched me freeze on the porch 6 years ago. You really are a cold, heartless monster, Richard snarled, his voice trembling with sudden venom. Your mother was right about you all along. You are a bitter, jealous girl who just wants to see her family suffer because you could never measure up to your sister. If we lose our house and end up on the street, it is your fault, Lisa. You are completely dead to me. He slammed the phone down, disconnecting the call abruptly. I picked up my coffee mug, my hand completely steady. I took a long sip, feeling absolutely nothing for the man who had just disowned me for the second time in my life. He was weak, and weak men always look for someone else to blame for their own catastrophic failures. But I knew the silence in my kitchen would not last long. Richard was merely the scout sent in to test the perimeter and see if I could be manipulated by guilt. Now that negotiations had officially failed, the real attack was coming. Brenda was going to unleash hell. Exactly 1 hour later, my phone buzzed violently on the counter. It was not a phone call or a text message. It was an urgent notification from the exclusive Suburban Homeowners Association Facebook group. I still had an active profile in the group from a rental property I secretly managed in their zip code. The notification banner flashed brightly across my screen. Brenda has just tagged you and 400 other residents in an urgent community alert. The nuclear social media strike had officially begun. I tapped the notification on my screen, opening the private Facebook group for the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. This group was the absolute epicenter of suburban gossip, a digital country club where wealthy housewives spent their days aggressively policing lawn lengths and judging each other's home renovations. And right there, pinned to the very top of the community feed by the group administrator, was a massive multi-paragraph post written by my mother. The title she used was capitalized for maximum dramatic effect. It read, "A Mother's Heartbreak and a Community Warning." I read through the sheer lunacy of her fabricated story while taking a slow sip of my coffee. Brenda had pulled out all the stops, weaponizing her status as the respected neighborhood treasurer to paint herself as a helpless elderly victim. She wrote that for the past 6 years, I had been secretly siphoning money out of her and Richard's retirement accounts. She claimed I used their hard-earned savings to fund an illegal underground shell company. According to her wildly unhinged post, my recent purchase of the Oak Ridge Country Club was entirely funded by elder abuse and dirty money. She did not stop there. She even went as far as to say that Jamal, her perfect corporate lawyer son-in-law, had bravely uncovered my massive fraud and confronted me about the stolen funds. According to Brenda, that was the exact reason why I had viciously attacked his law license with a fabricated ethics complaint. She spun a masterclass of absolute fiction, completely rewriting the narrative to make Jamal look like a heroic whistleblower instead of a desperate extortionist. She ended the post with a direct plea to the community. Please pray for my family. My daughter Lisa has lost her mind and her moral compass. We are currently working with local authorities to freeze her assets and recover our stolen life savings before we lose our family home. If you see Lisa near the neighborhood or the country club, please be careful. She is unstable, dangerous, and desperate. The comments section was an absolute feeding frenzy. Within a single hour, there were over 300 replies from the snobby neighbors I had grown up around. Mrs. Higgins, the busybody who lived right next door to my parents, wrote, "I am completely horrified, Brenda. I always knew there was something deeply wrong with that girl when she got pregnant out of wedlock and refused to listen to reason. We need to ban her from the subdivision immediately." Another neighbor, a local orthodontist who often played golf with my father, chimed in, Elder financial abuse is a massive federal felony. You should contact the authorities and have her arrested. We stand firmly with you, Brenda. Let us know if you need help covering any legal fees to get your money back. Madison had even commented from her own account, adding crying emojis and thanking the community for supporting them during this dark and terrifying time. I sat at my kitchen island, reading every single hateful comment as they rolled in real time. My mother was a master manipulator. She knew exactly how to play the affluent crowd, using their inherent bias against single mothers to completely validate her outrageous lies. She was trying to destroy my reputation in the business community before Jamal's official suspension hit the local news. She wanted to frame her impending bank foreclosure as the tragic result of my theft, completely covering up the fact that she and Richard had voluntarily gambled their home away to fund a fake luxury lifestyle. If this smear campaign had happened 6 years ago, I would have completely broken down. I would have drafted a long, highly emotional paragraph defending my character, begging the neighbors to believe me, and playing right into Brenda's narrative of an unstable, hysterical woman. But I was not a scared 27-year-old girl anymore. I was the founder of a highly successful private equity firm. I dealt with ruthless corporate sharks and hostile takeovers for a living. I did not argue with raw emotions, and I certainly did not engage in pointless internet screaming matches. I argued with cold, hard, undeniable facts. I closed out of the Facebook application and opened the secure, encrypted cloud drive on my laptop. I navigated through my meticulously organized legal folders until I found a specific directory labeled Historical Financial Audits. Inside that folder were high-resolution PDF scans of documents I had legally subpoenaed years ago during a deep dive into my own credit history. It was the absolute ultimate trump card, a devastating piece of evidence I had kept securely locked away, hoping I would never actually have to use it to destroy my own family. But Brenda had drawn the battle lines, and she had chosen a very public arena to wage her war. I dragged the files onto my desktop, opened the Facebook group back up, and hit the reply button on her massive post. It was time to show the wealthy suburbs exactly who the real thief was. I began typing my response directly beneath her massive, fabricated post. I did not use capital letters to express fake outrage. I did not use exclamation points to show panic. I kept my tone completely cold, professional, and entirely fact-based. I simply wrote, "Hello, neighbors. Since my mother Brenda has decided to make our private family finances a matter of public community record, I feel it is only fair to provide you with the actual documentation." I then attached 3 high-resolution PDF files from my secure encrypted drive. The first file was a certified bank statement from exactly 6 years ago. It clearly showed the balance of my educational savings account, which my late grandfather Theodore had set up specifically for my college tuition. The document showed a balance of exactly $60,000. The second file was a scanned copy of a withdrawal slip dated the exact same week my parents kicked me out of the house into the freezing snow. It showed a complete liquidation of the entire account. Right at the bottom of the slip next to the official bank teller's ink stamp was my signature. Except it was not my actual signature. It was a blatantly obvious forgery mimicking my handwriting, but completely missing the sharp upward loops I always used. To prove this beyond any reasonable doubt, I attached a side-by-side copy of my state driver's license signature from that exact same year for a direct visual comparison. The third and final document was the absolute nail in the coffin for Brenda's pristine public image. It was a scanned copy of the cleared cashier's check drawn directly from those exact withdrawn funds. The payee on the check was not Vanguard Holdings. The payee was a well-known luxury European auto dealership located in downtown Chicago. In the memo line written in Brenda's unmistakable cursive handwriting were the words "down payment for Madison's graduation present." I finished my comment with one final devastating paragraph. My mother did not lose her retirement savings to me. 6 years ago, she committed felony bank fraud, forged my signature, and drained my entire college fund just to buy my sister a luxury car to show off to all of you. Furthermore, the real reason she is currently facing a bank foreclosure is because she and Richard secretly took out a massive second mortgage to fund Jamal's failing law firm. A law firm he can no longer legally practice at because he was officially suspended by the State Bar Association this morning for attempting to extort my 6-year-old son. If anyone would like to see the official subpoena, I am more than happy to post that public record as well. I hit the enter key and watched the comment appear. I did not have to wait long for the massive fallout. In a wealthy suburban community where social status was absolutely everything, financial fraud was the ultimate unforgivable sin. These affluent homeowners despised nothing more than a scam artist living right next door. The digital silence in the group was almost deafening for about 10 minutes as hundreds of neighbors opened the PDF files and read the undeniable proof. Then the entire comment section completely flipped. Mrs. Higgins, the busybody neighbor who had just demanded my immediate banishment from the subdivision, was the very first to reply to my receipts. "Brenda, is this true?" she wrote, her tone shifting from supportive to completely horrified. "Did you seriously forge a signature to steal from your own pregnant daughter just to buy a Porsche?" Another neighbor, a retired corporate accountant, analyzed the documents and quickly chimed in. "That signature is a blatant forgery." The pressure marks on the digital scan show clear hesitation. "Brenda, you lied to all of us and tried to frame your own daughter for elder abuse just to cover up your own financial ruin." The notifications started pouring in so fast my phone screen became a complete blur. Madison tried to do some desperate damage control, replying to the thread claiming that the documents were doctored by me. But the retired accountant immediately shut her down, pointing out the official bank watermarks and the matching tracking numbers on the cleared cashier's check. The wealthy facade was entirely shattered. The perfect family Brenda had spent decades meticulously crafting was exposed as a desperate, broke, and criminal sham. Then the ultimate shift happened. The neighbors, absolutely outraged by the forgery and the blatant attempt to weaponize their community sympathy, began taking real action. The local orthodontist commented, "This is not just neighborhood drama anymore. This is a massive federal crime." He then typed the official Facebook handle of the suburban police department, tagging them directly in the comment thread. Dozens of other angry neighbors immediately followed his lead. "Tagging the police chief right now," one woman wrote. "The HOA board needs to hold an emergency meeting tonight to remove Brenda from her position as treasurer," wrote another. The wealthy neighbors had turned on Brenda with the exact same vicious intensity she had tried to use against me. I watched the screen as the digital execution of my mother's reputation unfolded in real time. Within 30 minutes of my comment going live, the president of the Homeowners Association, a notoriously strict woman named Mrs. Gable, stepped into the chaotic comment section. She pinned a new administrative message right at the top of the feed. "Due to the highly disturbing financial documents presented in this thread, Brenda is hereby suspended from her duties as neighborhood treasurer pending a formal emergency board vote tonight. We take allegations of bank fraud extremely seriously in this community." A few minutes later, Brenda's original post mysteriously vanished. She had panicked and deleted it, but it was far too late. The internet is forever, and dozens of neighbors had already taken screenshots of her unhinged lies and my undeniable proof. The digital fallout quickly bled into the real world. I knew exactly how fast the suburban exile was happening because my phone began ringing with frantic, angry calls from Madison. I let every single one go to voicemail, preferring to listen to her unravel from a safe distance. In her first message, Madison's voice was high-pitched and breathless. "Lisa, take those documents down right now. Mom is having a complete nervous breakdown. Her phone will not stop ringing. Mrs. Higgins just called to say she is permanently banned from the weekly bridge game. The country club ladies are blocking her number. You are ruining our lives." By the third voicemail, the sheer reality of their social death had fully set in. Madison's tone shifted from demanding to utterly terrified. "Lisa, please pick up the phone," she sobbed into the receiver. The neighborhood watch captain just drove by our house and glared at us from the street. My friends from the tennis club just canceled our lunch date and removed me from their group chat. They called me a fraud. Mom is locked in her bedroom crying hysterically. Nobody will speak to us. We cannot even walk outside to get the mail without the neighbors staring at us like we are criminals. Please tell everyone it was a misunderstanding. I deleted the voicemails one by one. I felt absolutely no guilt. For over 3 decades, Brenda had worshipped at the altar of suburban high society. She had sacrificed my childhood, my happiness, and my basic safety just to maintain the illusion of being a perfect, wealthy matriarch. She had weaponized that same society to try and destroy my business and my character. Now, the very people she had desperately tried to impress were the ones tearing her apart. The social exile was absolute brutal and entirely deserved. She was officially an outcast in the only world she ever truly cared about. I pictured my mother locked inside that sprawling brick colonial house, the same house where she had coldly watched me freeze on the front porch. The irony was incredibly thick. The walls of her pristine suburban fortress were finally closing in on her. She was trapped inside a home she could no longer afford, surrounded by neighbors who now openly despised her. She had spent her entire life judging others for their perceived flaws, and now she was the ultimate cautionary tale of the neighborhood. The Golden family was nothing more than a pathetic bankrupt lie, but the social humiliation was only the beginning of their nightmare. The financial consequences of their toxic enabling were moving much faster than they could possibly anticipate. They had gambled their entire future on Jamal's ability to project wealth completely, ignoring the massive debt ticking away in the background. With Jamal suspended without pay and his career in ruins, the delicate house of cards was finally collapsing under its own weight. As Brenda lay crying on her expensive imported rug, mourning the sudden death of her neighborhood reputation, she heard the heavy rumble of the postal delivery truck pulling up to the curb. She peeked through the expensive silk curtains of her bedroom window, her eyes red and swollen from hours of hysterical crying. She watched the mail carrier walk up the long manicured driveway. He did not just drop the normal letters in the box and leave. He walked directly up to the grand front door, holding a thick, rigid cardboard envelope in his hand. He rang the doorbell loudly and knocked twice. It was certified mail, the kind that requires a direct legal signature from the homeowner. Brenda wiped her face, pulled her silk robe tightly around her shoulders, and crept downstairs to open the door, completely unaware that the thick letter the mailman was handing her was about to deliver the final devastating blow to her perfectly fabricated life. Brenda's hands trembled as she took the heavy pen from the mail carrier. She scribbled her signature on the electronic pad, her eyes fixated on the return address printed in bold red letters. It was the executive correspondence department of their primary mortgage lender. She closed the heavy oak door and stood alone in the grand foyer, tearing the thick cardboard envelope open with her perfectly manicured nails. Her heart pounded violently against her ribs. Inside was a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy paper. The top page was titled, "Notice of Intent to Foreclose." Brenda felt her knees instantly buckle. She leaned heavily against the marble console table to keep herself from collapsing onto the floor. She read the terrifying numbers printed in stark black ink. Jamal had not just missed a single payment. His automated bank transfers had been bouncing for 2 solid months. He had been actively hiding the delinquency from everyone. The grace period was completely over. The bank was officially calling the loan. They had exactly 14 days to produce the full remaining balance of the second mortgage, which amounted to over $400,000, or the bank would seize the property and force a very public eviction. Richard stumbled down the grand staircase, still wearing his expensive silk pajamas and holding a half-empty cup of coffee. He took one look at Brenda's pale face and the official bank documents scattered across the imported marble floor. "What is that, Brenda?" he asked, his voice shaking with sudden apprehension. What did they send us? Brenda could not speak. She simply pointed a trembling finger at the papers. Richard knelt down and picked up the notice. As his eyes scanned the bold text, the color completely drained from his face. For my entire life, I had only known my father as a passive, avoidant man who ran away from conflict. But the sudden realization that he was about to become homeless utterly shattered his fragile psyche. Richard let out a guttural scream of pure rage. He grabbed a priceless crystal vase from the console table and hurled it violently across the foyer. It shattered into 1,000 pieces against the custom wainscoting. "We are ruined!" he roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "I worked for 40 years to buy this house. I drained my retirement account. I am going to lose my golf club membership. I am going to be living in a cheap motel because of that arrogant fraud you brought into this family. Lisa warned me about him, and I did not listen." Madison rushed out of the guest bedroom, her eyes wide with absolute panic as she stared at her father's unprecedented meltdown. "Dad, stop it!" she cried carefully, stepping over the shattered crystal to reach him. "Jamal is going to fix this. He just needs a little more time to get his license reinstated. The firm is going to realize they made a massive mistake." Richard turned his fury entirely on his golden child. He spat aggressively, waving the foreclosure notice directly in her face. "The bank is giving us exactly 14 days, Madison. Your husband has been bouncing checks for months. He lied to us. He took our equity and bought custom suits and a leased luxury car to play pretend. He is a criminal, and he dragged us right down with him. We are completely bankrupt." Brenda finally found her voice, though it was nothing more than a pathetic wail. "The neighbors," she sobbed loudly, sliding down the wall and covering her face with her hands. "The entire neighborhood is going to watch the sheriffs. Deputies drag our furniture out onto the front lawn. I cannot show my face in this town ever again. Lisa did this to us. She planned this entire thing just to humiliate me. Even in the face of their own catastrophic financial stupidity, they still blamed me." The toxic family was completely imploding, tearing each other apart inside the beautiful house they were about to lose. Madison was screaming at Richard. Richard was cursing Brenda for making him sign the mortgage. The grand foyer sounded like an absolute war zone. Suddenly, the heavy front door swung open with a loud bang. Jamal stood in the doorway. He did not look like the polished corporate attorney who had strutted into my office just yesterday. His silk tie was gone, his dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, and his eyes were wild and bloodshot. But instead of looking defeated, he wore a massive, terrifyingly confident smile. He was clutching a thick roll of commercial property listings and a manila folder under his arm. "Shut up!" Jamal barked, his deep voice slicing right through the chaotic screaming. "Everyone just shut up and listen to me right now. I have the ultimate solution." Madison ran to him, grabbing his arm frantically. "Jamal, the bank is foreclosing. They are taking the house in 2 weeks." Jamal laughed, a manic, unhinged sound that echoed off the high ceilings. "Let them try. I just secured $2 million in private funding. I found a massive commercial property going up for a county bank auction tomorrow morning. It is an absolute gold mine. We are going to buy it, flip it to a commercial developer I know by next week, and walk away with $1 million in pure profit. We are going to pay off this house, save my firm, and absolutely crush Lisa once and for all." Madison stared at her husband, her tear-streaked face suddenly filling with desperate hope. $2 million, she repeated breathlessly. "Jamal, how on earth did you get a loan that size? The bank just suspended your accounts this morning and froze our credit cards." Jamal waved his hand dismissively, his chest puffed out with manic pride. "I did not go to a traditional bank, Madison. Banks are for average people with absolutely no vision. I went to a private equity lender, a hard money contact I met through one of my former high-net-worth corporate clients. He was lying, of course. He had not gone to a legitimate private equity firm." Just 12 hours earlier, under the cover of darkness, Jamal had driven his slate gray Porsche to a windowless concrete building on the gritty south side of Chicago. He had walked into the smoke-filled office of a notorious shadow lender. A man who did not ask for credit scores, who did not run background checks, and who certainly did not care about State Bar Association suspensions. This private lender only cared about collateral and exorbitant predatory interest rates. To secure the $2 million hard money loan, Jamal had committed his second massive felony of the week. He had handed the loan shark a heavily doctored financial portfolio, falsely claiming he was still an active senior partner at his corporate law firm, drawing a massive salary. He put up his leased luxury vehicle as collateral, intentionally hiding the fact that he did not actually own the title to the car. He even forged a signature on a falsified deed, claiming he had substantial equity in a downtown commercial high-rise. The shadowy lender did not bother verifying the paperwork through official state channels. He simply looked at Jamal's expensive custom suit, smiled a cold and terrifying smile, and handed over the capital with a staggering 40% monthly interest rate. If Jamal did not repay the principal, plus the massive interest within exactly 30 days, the lender made it crystal clear that the consequences would be severe, physical, and highly illegal. But standing in my parents' ruined foyer, Jamal completely omitted those terrifying details. He only spoke about the glorious victory ahead. The property is a massive abandoned industrial warehouse located right on the edge of the new county development zone, Jamal explained, pacing the marble floor like a brilliant general addressing his troops. The county is dumping it at a public bank auction tomorrow morning because the previous owner went completely bankrupt. I have inside knowledge from a commercial developer friend. They desperately want that specific plot of land for a new luxury shopping center, but the county bureaucracy has been stalling them for years. Jamal slapped the manila folder against his palm, his eyes gleaming with sheer, unadulterated greed. If I buy that warehouse at the public auction tomorrow morning, I become the sole gatekeeper. The massive developer will have absolutely no choice but to buy the deed directly from me. I will buy it for $2 million, flip it to the developer for $3.5 million by next Friday, and we walk away totally clean. We pay off the second mortgage, we save this house, and I use the leftover cash to start my own law firm. I do not need the State Bar Association to approve of me. I am going to be a real estate mogul. Brenda clapped her hands together, a sudden hysterical laugh escaping her lips. "Oh, Jamal! I knew you would save us!" she cried, rushing forward to hug him tightly. "You are brilliant! You are going to fix everything. Lisa thought she could destroy us, but you are going to show her and all those snobby neighbors exactly who we really are." Madison hugged him from the other side, her previous panic completely forgotten. "We are going to be so much richer than Lisa." Madison said, her eyes wide with toxic delusion. "She thinks her little country club makes her special. We are going to completely crush her." Richard stood silently by the staircase. As a former bank employee, he knew deep down that commercial real estate flips were never this simple. He knew there were massive hidden risks. But he was a weak, cowardly man, staring down the barrel of a 14-day eviction notice. He had absolutely no other options left. So he swallowed his pride, ignored his glaring suspicions, and blindly placed his absolute faith in the arrogant man who had just destroyed their lives. The next morning, the toxic family dressed for war. Brenda put on her most expensive designer dress and clamped her diamond necklace around her throat, determined to project extreme wealth. Madison spent 2 hours perfectly styling her hair and makeup. Jamal put on a brand new custom suit and slicked back his hair. They climbed into the leased Porsche Macan, completely delusional and utterly convinced of their impending triumph. As Jamal gripped the leather steering wheel and drove toward the county courthouse, he felt an overwhelming surge of pure adrenaline. He had a $2 million cashier's check sitting right in his breast pocket. He felt like an absolute god. He felt entirely invincible. He had no idea he was driving his family straight into a financial slaughterhouse. The downtown county courthouse was a massive, imposing building made of heavy gray stone. Inside, the municipal auction room smelled strongly of stale coffee and harsh floor wax. It was a sterile, unforgiving environment where fortunes were legally stripped away and handed over to the absolute highest bidder. At exactly 9:45 in the morning, the heavy double doors at the back of the room swung open. Jamal, Madison, and Brenda strutted into the auction house like they were walking down a red carpet at a Hollywood premiere. Richard trailed slightly behind them, looking incredibly anxious, but the other three were absolutely radiating with toxic arrogance. Jamal led the pack, his custom suit tailored flawlessly to his broad frame. He walked with the aggressive swagger of a billionaire, completely ignoring the regular local contractors and small-time real estate investors scattered throughout the folding chairs. He marched straight down the center aisle to the very front row and claimed 4 seats right in front of the auctioneer's wooden podium. Madison sat down next to him, crossing her legs and loudly complaining about the cheap plastic chairs. Brenda spent several minutes dramatically adjusting her diamond necklace, making absolutely sure everyone in the room noticed her supposed wealth. They were completely oblivious to the fact that true wealth does not need to loudly perform for strangers. Jamal leaned back in his chair, casually patting the breast pocket of his suit jacket where the $2 million borrowed cashier's check was safely tucked away. He turned his head to scan the large room, eagerly looking for an audience to witness his impending financial triumph. That is exactly when his dark eyes locked onto mine. I was sitting quietly in the very back row of the auction house. I was not wearing expensive designer labels or flashy jewelry. I was dressed in a simple, understated tan trench coat, with my dark hair pulled back into a neat ponytail. I looked like any other tired single mother, hoping to find a cheap real estate bargain. When Jamal spotted me, his arrogant smile widened into a predatory grin. He leaned over, whispered something to Madison, and then stood up confidently. He casually buttoned his suit jacket and walked up the center aisle, stopping right in front of my chair. "Well, well, well," Jamal said, his deep voice carrying a mocking, highly condescending tone. "Look who decided to show up at the big boy table. I have to admit, Lisa, I am actually surprised to see you here. I figured buying that country club would have completely tapped out whatever shady little loan you managed to secure." I looked up at him, keeping my expression entirely neutral. "Hello, Jamal. It is a public county auction. Anyone is allowed to attend." He chuckled, shaking his head as if he deeply pitied me. "Do not tell me you are actually trying to bid today. What are you looking for, Lisa?" "A little $50,000 foreclosed starter home in the bad part of town. Maybe a tiny duplex you can rent out to help pay for your kids' groceries." It is honestly pathetic. You come in here wearing a cheap coat, trying to play the real estate game with the actual professionals. You should just go home before you embarrass yourself. I crossed my arms and leaned back in my metal chair. "And I suppose you are here to buy something a little more substantial?" I asked, intentionally baiting his massive ego. Jamal puffed out his chest proudly. "I am not here to play in the minor leagues, Lisa. I am here for the main event. There is a massive commercial industrial complex hitting the auction block at 10 o'clock sharp. It is a multi-million-dollar play. A flip that requires serious capital and actual industry connections. Something a small-time amateur like you could never even comprehend. Today is the day my family secures generational wealth, and I am the one making it happen. I just wanted to come over here and make sure you have a clear view of my total victory." He gave me one last condescending smirk before turning around and strutting back to his seat in the front row. Madison turned around and waved at me, offering a vicious, mocking little flutter of her fingers before turning back to face the podium. I watched them settle into their seats, practically vibrating with greedy excitement. They were completely convinced they had outsmarted the entire financial system. They thought I was a broke, defeated woman watching them ascend to greatness. I did not feel a single ounce of anger. In fact, I felt a deep, profound sense of absolute calm. I did not say another word. I simply smiled, reached up, and casually adjusted the dark sunglasses resting on top of my head. It was a prearranged, highly subtle movement. Across the massive auction room, sitting quietly in the shadows near the side exit, a tall man in a plain gray suit caught my signal. He was a professional proxy bidder I had hired through an exclusive third-party firm in New York. He had no direct ties to Vanguard Holdings, and Jamal had absolutely no idea who he was. The proxy gave me a barely perceptible nod, tapped his numbered bidding paddle against his knee, and waited for the trap to officially spring shut. The auctioneer, a stern older man with a booming voice, stepped up to the heavy wooden podium right at 10 o'clock. He quickly rattled through the standard legal disclaimers and auctioned off 3 minor residential properties. Jamal shifted impatiently in his front row seat, tapping his expensive leather shoes aggressively against the floor. He was absolutely not interested in the small change. Finally, the large digital screen behind the podium flashed with the images of the massive abandoned industrial warehouse. "We now move to lot number 412, the auctioneer announced into the microphone. "This is a substantial commercial industrial complex located on 20 acres of prime county development land. The property is being sold completely as is, with all existing faults and severe encumbrances. The starting bid is set at $800,000. Jamal did not even wait for the auctioneer to finish taking a breath. He raised his paddle high in the air, leaning back in his chair to make sure the entire room saw him. $1 million, Jamal called out, his deep courtroom voice projecting pure dominance. He wanted to instantly crush any small-time investors and claim his prize right out of the gate. Madison clapped her hands, silently beaming with absolute pride at her husband. The auctioneer nodded toward the front row. "We have $1 million from the gentleman in the front. Do I hear 1.1? From the shadows near the side exit, my hired proxy casually raised his paddle. $1.2 million, the proxy said clearly, his voice completely devoid of emotion. Jamal snapped his head toward the side of the room, his arrogant smile faltering slightly. He had fully expected to walk away uncontested. He glared at the man in the gray suit, then raised his paddle again. $1.5 million, Jamal snapped, raising the stakes aggressively to scare the new competitor away. $1.7 million, my proxy countered instantly, not even looking in Jamal's direction. A low murmur rippled through the auction house. Bidding wars of this magnitude were incredibly rare in this county. I sat perfectly still in the back row, watching the psychological warfare unfold exactly as I had orchestrated. Jamal was a man ruled entirely by his massive ego. He had brought his wife and his mother-in-law to watch him become a millionaire. He had specifically walked back to my seat to mock me and guarantee I was watching his supposed triumph. Losing this public auction in front of me was a fate worse than death to him. $2 million, Jamal shouted, standing up from his chair. The veins in his neck were beginning to bulge. He had just hit the absolute maximum limit of the hard money loan he secured from the shadow lender. He was supposed to stop right there. That was the ceiling of his stolen capital. Madison tugged nervously on his suit jacket. "Jamal, that is all the cash we have," she whispered frantically. Jamal ignored her completely. He was staring daggers at the proxy, totally consumed by the red-hot adrenaline of the auction floor. He was not going to let some anonymous suit humiliate him in front of his family and in front of me. $2.2 million, my proxy stated calmly, raising his paddle without a single second of hesitation. The auctioneer looked down at Jamal. "The bid is now at $2.2 million. Sir, I must remind you that all winning bids require immediate execution of non-refundable contracts and proof of liquid funds. Do you wish to proceed?" Jamal's chest heaved. He turned around and looked directly at me, sitting in the back row. I offered him a polite, condescending little smile. That tiny smile completely shattered his remaining sanity. In his mind, I was laughing at his failure. He could not handle the humiliation. He knew he could illegally leverage the remaining equity in his parents' house, drain the very last of Richard's retirement accounts, and max out his hidden credit lines to bridge the massive gap. He was willing to risk absolute total financial ruin just to win. $2.5 million, Jamal roared, his voice echoing violently off the high ceilings. The entire room gasped. Brenda covered her mouth with both hands, completely overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the money being thrown around. It was his absolute maximum limit. It was every single penny of borrowed money, stolen equity, and hidden credit he could possibly access. He was entirely leveraged. If he went one single dollar higher, he would not be able to clear the strict escrow process. I caught the eye of my proxy across the room. I gave him a slow, deliberate nod. The man in the gray suit immediately lowered his numbered paddle and placed it resting on his knee. He stepped back into the shadows and crossed his arms, indicating he was completely finished bidding. $2.5 million going once, the auctioneer called out, scanning the silent room. Going twice. Sold to the gentleman in the front row. The heavy wooden gavel slammed down with a loud final crack. Jamal had just won the auction. The echo of the heavy wooden gavel slamming against the podium sent an absolute shockwave of pure euphoria through the front row. Jamal shot up from his cheap plastic folding chair, throwing both of his arms high into the air. He let out a loud, booming cheer that completely disregarded the formal decorum of the county courthouse. "I did it!" he shouted, his voice cracking with intense adrenaline. He turned to his right and grabbed Madison, pulling her into a massive, triumphant hug. Madison burst into hysterical tears of joy, burying her face in his custom suit jacket. "We are saved!" she sobbed loudly, her manicured hands gripping his shoulders tightly. "We are rich, Jamal! You actually did it!" Brenda was right beside them, weeping openly and clapping her hands together. She threw her arms around Jamal's neck, pressing her tear-stained cheek against his. "I never doubted you for a single second," Brenda cried completely, forgetting that just 24 hours ago she was screaming about becoming homeless. "You are the savior of this family. You are absolutely brilliant." Richard stood up slowly, letting out a massive, shuddering breath of relief. He wiped the nervous sweat from his forehead, genuinely believing that the suffocating weight of the impending bank foreclosure had just been magically lifted from his shoulders. But Jamal's celebration was not complete without his favorite element: pure, unadulterated gloating. He gently pushed his weeping wife and mother-in-law aside and spun around to face the back of the room. He locked eyes with me, pointing his index finger aggressively in my direction. "Do you see this, Lisa?" he yelled across the silent auction floor, completely ignoring the annoyed glares of the other professional investors. "This is what real power looks like. This is what actual generational wealth looks like. You thought you could intimidate me by buying a failing country club. You thought you could destroy my career and leave me with absolutely nothing. Well, look at me now." He took a few steps up the center aisle, beating his chest with his fist. "I just secured the biggest commercial real estate deal in this entire county. I am the true mastermind of this family, not you. You can take your little shell company and go back to your dingy office. Watch the news next week, Lisa. Watch me flip this warehouse to the highest bidder and make $1 million in pure cash. You are absolutely nothing compared to me." I did not react to his unhinged public screaming. I did not stand up, and I certainly did not look defeated. I just sat quietly in my tan trench coat, offering him the exact same polite, condescending smile I had given him earlier. "Enjoy your new property, Jamal," I said softly. Even though I did not shout, my calm voice seemed to cut right through the heavy tension in the room. Jamal sneered, turning his back on me to face the auctioneer. The stern older man behind the podium cleared his throat loudly into the microphone. "Congratulations on the winning bid, sir," the auctioneer said, his tone strictly business. "Please approach the podium with your valid state identification and your proof of funds. We need to execute the binding purchase agreement and transfer the non-refundable deposit immediately." Jamal practically floated to the front of the room. He strutted up to the heavy wooden desk, pulling his wallet and the $2 million borrowed cashier's check from his breast pocket. He slapped the check down onto the podium with a loud, arrogant smack. $2 million in certified funds right there," Jamal boasted loudly. I will wire the remaining 500,000 from my private accounts before the end of the business day. Draw up the paperwork. The auctioneer inspected the cashier's check carefully, verifying the watermarks before nodding to his clerk. The clerk handed Jamal a blue pen and pushed a standard one-page purchase agreement across the desk. By signing this document, you acknowledge that you are entering into a legally binding contract to purchase Lot 412, the auctioneer recited mechanically. You are purchasing the property completely, as is accepting full liability for any and all existing structural, environmental, and financial encumbrances attached to the deed. The sale is completely final. I know exactly how a commercial auction works, Jamal snapped impatiently, snatching the blue pen and scribbling his signature across the bottom line. He felt like an absolute king. He had just conquered the real estate market. Excellent, the auctioneer said, taking the signed agreement back. He then reached under the podium and pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. He handed the massive packet over to Jamal. These are the mandatory property disclosures and the official county inspection reports associated with the deed. They are now legally your responsibility. Jamal grabbed the thick packet with a confident smirk. He casually flipped open the heavy cardboard cover to glance at the summary page, expecting to see standard zoning boilerplate. His eyes scanned the first paragraph of the fine print. He blinked once. He blinked twice. He read the heavy bold text again. The blood completely drained from his face. His confident, arrogant smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, suffocating horror. His confident, arrogant smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, suffocating horror. Jamal felt his stomach drop out completely as his eyes darted across the bold, red text printed on the very first page of the massive disclosure packet. This was not a standard zoning summary. It was a formal, legally binding mandate from the Federal Environmental Protection Agency. The entire 20-acre industrial complex he had just purchased was officially classified as a severe toxic biohazard site. According to the engineering reports attached, the massive warehouse structures were completely riddled with deteriorating asbestos. The soil and the groundwater beneath the concrete foundation were severely contaminated with chemical runoff from the previous manufacturing tenant. The county had effectively condemned the property 3 years ago. The estimated cost for the mandatory environmental cleanup was absolutely staggering. It would take a minimum of $4 million in specialized hazardous material removal before any commercial developer would even be legally permitted to set foot on the soil. The developer friend Jamal had bragged about was never going to buy this land in its current state. The massive development firm had simply been waiting for an arrogant fool to purchase it at a public auction and absorb the massive federal cleanup costs for them. Jamal flipped the page, his hands shaking so violently that the heavy paper rattled loudly against the solid wooden podium. The second page detailed the existing financial encumbrances. Because the property had been abandoned and fined repeatedly by the county for severe code violations, it currently carried $1.5 million in unpaid municipal tax liens. By signing the binding as-is purchase agreement just seconds ago, Jamal had not just spent $2.5 million of borrowed shadow money. He had legally assumed the massive tax debt and the multi-million-dollar environmental liability. The auctioneer looked at him with cold indifference. "Please step aside, sir," the auctioneer instructed, reaching for his microphone to announce the next lot. "You have your executed contract. The title transfer will be recorded by the county clerk this afternoon. Have a good day." Jamal could not move. He was completely paralyzed, trapped in a financial black hole of his own making. The math spun violently in his head. He owed $2 million to a ruthless, violent loan shark who charged 40% monthly interest. He owed $500,000 from his hidden credit lines. He now personally owed the county $1.5 million in back taxes. And he owned a completely worthless, toxic wasteland that he could not legally sell, flip, or develop. He had just essentially signed a financial death warrant for himself and his entire family. Madison noticed his sudden paralysis from the front row. She stepped forward, her victorious smile faltering, as she saw the beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Jamal, what is wrong? She asked, her voice tight with sudden anxiety. Why are you shaking like that? Let me see the paperwork. We need to go celebrate. Jamal snatched the packet away from her grasp, holding it tightly against his chest, as if he could hide the catastrophic truth. He could not answer her. His throat was completely constricted, his breathing shallow and erratic. He was an experienced corporate attorney. He knew exactly how binding these auction contracts were. There was absolutely no cooling off period. There was no legal loophole to exploit. He had willingly bid on an as-is commercial lot. He had waived his right to a preliminary inspection just to secure the quick sale. A cold, sickening realization began to creep up the back of his neck, freezing the blood in his veins. Commercial properties with liabilities. This massive do not just accidentally end up at county auctions. A smart, calculated investor intentionally dumps them. A strategic corporate entity uses the public auction system to legally offload toxic, unsellable assets onto greedy, unsuspecting buyers who are too arrogant to read the fine print before they sign the dotted line. Jamal frantically flipped past the massive tax documents and the environmental citations, desperately searching for the original title transfer. He needed to see the name of the previous owner. He needed to know exactly who had just orchestrated his absolute total destruction. His manicured finger traced the heavy black ink down the page to the seller information printed clearly at the very top of the finalized deed. The seller was not a bankrupt manufacturing company. The seller was a highly successful private equity firm. The name printed in bold black ink read Vanguard Holdings. Jamal stared at the two words printed on the deed, Vanguard Holdings. The letters seemed to blur together as the blood rushed forcefully in his ears. He looked up, his eyes wide with a manic, terrified realization, and searched the back row of the auction house. I was already standing up. I smoothed the lapels of my tan trench coat, grabbed my handbag, and began walking slowly down the center aisle. The loud click of my heels against the hard linoleum floor echoed through the silent room like the ticking of a countdown clock. Jamal watched me approach, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. Madison, Brenda, and Richard turned around, confused by my sudden movement and Jamal's sudden, terrifying silence. I stopped right in front of the heavy wooden podium, standing just a few feet away from my completely paralyzed brother-in-law. "Thank you, Jamal," I said, my voice echoing clearly across the auction floor. "I really cannot express my gratitude enough. You just took my absolute worst, most toxic, completely unsellable asset right off my hands, and you did it at a staggering 400% markup. It truly is a masterclass in commercial real estate investment." Madison frowned, looking back and forth between Jamal and me. "What are you talking about, Lisa?" she demanded, her voice trembling slightly. "Jamal just bought this property from the county. He beat you. We won." "He did not buy it from the county, Madison," I replied, keeping my eyes locked onto Jamal's pale, sweating face. "He bought it directly from me. My firm purchased that abandoned warehouse 3 years ago for practically nothing. When we discovered the severe asbestos contamination and the massive tax liens, it became a complete financial black hole. I have been trying to legally offload that toxic wasteland for years without taking a massive corporate loss. Then you walked into my office yesterday and bragged about your desperate need for a quick flip. You told me exactly how arrogant and greedy you were. So I set the perfect trap." Jamal finally found his voice, though it was nothing more than a ragged, breathless whisper. The proxy bidder, he choked out, pointing a trembling finger toward the empty chairs near the side exit. "Exactly," I smiled, nodding slowly. "I hired him to drive the price up. I knew you would never let a stranger beat you in front of me. Your ego is so massive, so incredibly fragile, that you completely ignored the most basic rule of real estate. You did not read the disclosures. You just kept bidding blindly because you wanted to publicly humiliate me. You wanted to prove you were the smartest man in the room. And now you own a condemned biohazard site, you owe the federal government millions in cleanup fees, and you owe the county over $1 million in back taxes. You literally paid me $2.5 million to take my garbage. The realization hit the family like a physical blow. Brenda gasped, clutching her chest as if she were having a heart attack. Richard stumbled backward, grabbing the back of a plastic chair to keep from collapsing. He understood the math instantly. He knew Jamal had just signed a binding contract that would utterly bankrupt them all for the rest of their natural lives. "You tricked him!" Madison shrieked, tears of pure rage streaming down her face. She rushed forward, trying to grab the documents from Jamal's frozen hands. "You set us up, Lisa. You completely destroyed us on purpose." "I did not set him up," I replied coldly. "I simply placed a mirror in front of him. Jamal destroyed himself. You all destroyed yourselves. You were so incredibly eager to steal my son's trust fund, so eager to watch me fail, that you threw every single penny you had into a blind gamble. You bet your house, your savings, and your entire future on a man who only cares about his own reflection. Your greed is what bankrupted you today. I just provided the paperwork." Jamal looked down at the signed purchase agreement. He looked at the massive cashier's check he had just handed to the clerk. It was gone. The transaction was completely finalized. He had absolutely nothing left. No firm, no license, no money, and millions of dollars in inescapable debt. The sheer magnitude of his failure completely shattered his mind. The polished corporate lawyer vanished entirely, replaced by a desperate, cornered animal. "You manipulative piece of trash!" Jamal roared, a terrifying guttural sound that ripped through his throat. In a fit of blind, uncontrollable rage, Jamal dropped the heavy manila folder and lunged aggressively across the space between us. His large hands reached directly for my throat, his eyes wide with violent intent. He intended to physically destroy me right there in the courthouse, but he never even touched me. Before I could even take a step back, 3 armed courthouse security officers rushed forward from the sidelines. The lead officer hit Jamal with the force of a freight train, wrapping his arms around Jamal's waist and tackling him violently to the hard linoleum floor. The heavy impact knocked the wind completely out of Jamal, but he continued to thrash wildly, screaming curses at me as the other 2 officers piled on top of him, aggressively pinning his arms behind his back and pulling out their heavy metal handcuffs. "Get off me!" Jamal gasped, his face pressed hard against the cold linoleum floor of the courthouse. The heavy knee of the lead security officer remained firmly planted between his shoulder blades. The click of the steel handcuffs echoed through the silent auction room. The arrogant corporate attorney was completely reduced to a violently thrashing criminal in front of dozens of investors. Madison screamed and rushed forward, but another officer quickly stepped in her path, holding up a hand to keep her back. "Ma'am, stay exactly where you are," the officer commanded forcefully. "Your husband just attempted to assault a citizen in a federal building." I stood perfectly still, looking down at the man who had threatened to take my son away. He breathed heavily. His custom suit completely ruined his silk tie, twisted tightly around his neck. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. He had built his entire identity on intimidation and false wealth, and now the entire facade was permanently shattered. "Are you injured, ma'am?" the lead officer asked me, pulling Jamal roughly to his feet. "Do you want to press formal assault charges against this individual?" I looked at Jamal. His dark eyes were wide with sheer terror. If I pressed charges, he would go to jail immediately. But jail was far too easy. In jail, he would get 3 square meals and a bed. I wanted him to be fully awake to experience the catastrophic financial ruin he had just signed up for. I wanted him to face the ruthless shadow lender he owed millions to. I wanted him to explain to the county why he could not pay the massive lien he just legally assumed. "No, officer," I replied calmly, adjusting the collar of my trench coat. "He did not actually touch me, just escort him off the premises. I think he has far bigger problems to worry about today." The officers nodded, grabbing Jamal by the arms and forcibly marching him up the center aisle. Madison, Brenda, and Richard followed closely behind a pathetic parade of absolute defeat. They stumbled out of the heavy double doors, leaving the auction room completely silent. I took a deep breath, feeling a massive weight finally lift off my shoulders. The toxic empire my family had built on lies and manipulation was officially completely destroyed. Outside the building, the cold Chicago wind whipped fiercely against their faces. The officers removed the handcuffs at the bottom of the steps, issuing Jamal a trespass warning before walking back inside. Jamal rubbed his bruised wrists, his entire body shaking uncontrollably. He looked at his wife and his parents-in-law. Nobody said a word. There was absolutely nothing left to say. They were completely bankrupt. The bank was foreclosing on the family home in less than 14 days. Jamal had been permanently stripped of his law license. They owed millions of dollars to the government for the toxic wasteland they now legally owned, and they owed millions more to a violent loan shark, who would be demanding his 40% interest by the end of the month. "We need to go home," Richard finally whispered, his voice sounding hollow and completely devoid of life. He looked 20 years older than he had just an hour ago. "We need to go pack our things." Jamal nodded numbly, reaching into his pocket for his car keys. They walked slowly toward the visitor parking lot, a broken, silent group of people who had just lost everything. They turned the corner of the concrete garage, heading toward the spot where Jamal had parked his leased vehicle. But as they approached the parking space, Jamal stopped dead in his tracks. A loud mechanical whirring sound filled the air. A massive tow truck was backed up directly to his slate-gray Porsche Macan. A man in a grease-stained jumpsuit was securing heavy chains around the rear axle. The front wheels of the Porsche were already lifted high off the ground. "Hey, Jamal," shouted his voice, cracking with sudden panic. "What do you think you are doing? That is my car. Put it down right now." He ran toward the tow truck, waving his arms frantically. The large man in the jumpsuit did not even flinch. He finished tightening the heavy winch cable, wiped his greasy hands on a rag, and turned to face the frantic, ruined man running toward him. "Are you Jamal, the tow truck driver?" asked, pulling a thick clipboard from the passenger seat of his rig. "Yes, I am Jamal," he barked, trying desperately to summon his old courtroom authority. "Unhook my vehicle immediately, or I will sue your entire company for grand theft auto." The tow truck driver laughed, a harsh, entirely unsympathetic sound. He ripped a yellow carbon copy sheet off his clipboard and shoved it directly into Jamal's chest. "You cannot sue anybody, buddy. Your leasing company ordered an immediate repossession this morning. You missed 3 consecutive payments and your credit accounts are completely frozen. This car does not belong to you anymore. Have a really nice day." The driver climbed into the cab of his truck, slammed the heavy door, and shifted into gear. The massive diesel engine roared to life. Jamal, Madison, Brenda, and Richard stood completely frozen in the freezing wind, watching the slate-gray Porsche being towed away down the busy downtown street. The repo man had just handed Jamal the final piece of paperwork, sealing their absolute ruin. They had no money, no home, no careers, and now no transportation. They were stranded in the cold concrete parking lot, officially destitute. 3 weeks passed, like a slow-moving nightmare for my family. The 14-day grace period on the second mortgage expired without a single miracle. On a cold, rainy Tuesday morning, 2 armed county sheriff deputies arrived at the sprawling brick colonial house my parents had lived in for over 3 decades. They did not care about Brenda's former high status as the neighborhood treasurer. They simply handed her an official court-ordered eviction notice and stood watch while a bank-hired foreclosure crew began carrying their expensive custom furniture out onto the damp front lawn. The wealthy neighbors, my mother had spent her entire life trying to impress, stood on their pristine covered porches, watching the humiliating spectacle unfold in complete silence. Not a single person walked over to offer help. Not a single former friend offered them a warm place to stay. The velvet sofas and antique wooden tables were left in the pouring rain, completely ruined. Jamal's situation was infinitely worse. Following a rapid and highly publicized ethics hearing, the Illinois State Bar Association officially and permanently disbarred him. His face and the detailed transcript of his criminal extortion attempt were plastered across local legal blogs and community news websites. But losing his prestigious career was the absolute least of his daily worries. The ruthless shadow lender who had provided the $2 million hard money loan was actively hunting him down. Jamal jumped at every shadow and flinched at every loud noise. He forced the family to constantly move from one cheap location to another, terrified that the violent loan sharks would finally track him down to collect their massive 40% interest. The arrogant, untouchable corporate lawyer who once bullied junior associates was now a paranoid, sweating fugitive, hiding in the absolute bottom rung of society. By the end of the third week, the four of them were crammed into a single dingy room at a rundown roadside motel on the gritty outskirts of the county. The cramped room smelled heavily of stale cigarette smoke and damp mildew, a stark and horrifying contrast to the imported marble and crystal chandeliers they were used to. Richard sat perfectly still on the edge of the sagging mattress, staring blankly at the stained carpet. He had barely spoken a single word since the day of the county auction. He looked completely hollowed out, a broken shell of a man who had cowardly gambled his entire life away on a toxic lie just to keep the peace in his household. Madison stood at the front desk of the motel lobby, her hands shaking violently as she handed her platinum credit card to the bored clerk behind the thick plexiglass window. She was desperately trying to pay for one more night of shelter. Her designer clothes were wrinkled and unwashed, and the dark circles under her eyes betrayed weeks of sleepless, terrified nights. The clerk swiped the card through the digital machine. It beeped aggressively, flashing a bright red declined message on the screen. Madison swallowed hard, her throat painfully dry, and dug frantically into her designer purse. She pulled out a different card and handed it over. Another aggressive beep. Declined. She tried 3 more cards, finally maxing out every single line of hidden credit she had ever opened. The clerk let out a heavy sigh, sliding the useless plastic cards back across the scratched counter. "You are completely tapped out, ma'am," the clerk said flatly. "You and your family need to vacate the room by noon today, or I am calling the local police to escort you off the property for trespassing." Madison walked slowly back to the cramped motel room, silent tears streaming down her pale face. She pushed the flimsy door open, closed it behind her, and leaned heavily against the cheap wood, sliding down to the dirty floor. "All the credit cards are completely blocked," she sobbed, burying her face in her trembling hands. "We have exactly $20 in cash left to our names. We cannot even buy a hot lunch, let alone pay for another night in this awful place. Jamal, you have to call someone right now. Call your old law firm partners. Call your college fraternity brothers. We cannot sleep out on the street tonight." Jamal paced the small room like a trapped animal, aggressively peering through the dusty window blinds at every passing car. "I cannot call anyone, Madison." He snapped, his voice sharp and completely frantic. "My phone is completely turned off, so the lenders cannot track my location through the GPS. Everyone at the firm completely hates me. My friends stopped answering my desperate emails 2 weeks ago. We are entirely on our own." The heavy, suffocating reality of absolute homelessness finally settled over the cramped room. They had exhausted every single financial resource. They had maliciously burned every single bridge they ever had. They had absolutely nowhere to go and no one left to call. Then from the dark corner of the room, Brenda slowly stood up. She wiped her bloodshot eyes, swallowing every last ounce of her remaining pride. The wealthy suburban matriarch was finally broken. "There is one person who has a massive home and enough room for all of us," Brenda whispered, her voice trembling with raw desperation. "She has a gated estate with private security. She is flesh and blood. She has to take us in. We are going to Lisa's house." They spent their very last $20 on a budget rideshare vehicle that smelled like stale fast food. The driver dropped them off at the end of a winding, tree-lined road in the most exclusive zip code in the entire state. The rain was coming down in freezing, heavy sheets, soaking through their wrinkled clothes within seconds. They dragged their cheap duffel bags up the steep driveway until they finally reached the entrance of my property. The massive wrought iron gate stood 12 feet high, flanked by thick stone pillars and high-definition security cameras. Beyond the gates, at the end of a long, perfectly manicured driveway, sat my sprawling, multi-million-dollar modern estate. The large windows glowed with warm, inviting light against the dark, stormy night. It was a fortress of absolute security and undeniable wealth. It was everything Brenda had ever dreamed of, and it belonged to the daughter she had completely discarded. Brenda stepped up to the glowing silver intercom panel mounted on the stone pillar. Her hands were shaking violently from the freezing cold as she pressed the heavy brass button. She waited, shivering in the pouring rain, but there was no immediate answer. "Press it again!" Madison cried, her teeth chattering loudly. "My feet are completely numb. We are going to freeze to death out here." Brenda pressed the button repeatedly, leaning her wet face close to the speaker. "Lisa," she called out, her voice cracking with raw, pathetic desperation. "Lisa. Honey, it is your mother. Please open the gates. We are completely soaked. We have nowhere else to go." Jamal stood behind them, his head bowed in utter defeat. The freezing rain plastered his hair to his forehead. He looked up at the security cameras, knowing full well my private executive security team was watching their every single move. Lisa Jamal yelled over the sound of the heavy rain, his voice stripped of all its former arrogant power. "I am sorry. I was wrong. I was completely out of line. Please, just let the women inside. You have proven your point. You won." Richard stepped forward, pushing his way next to Brenda at the intercom. "Lisa, sweetheart, please listen to us," he begged, trying to summon that fake paternal warmth one last time. "We are a family. Families make mistakes. We were under so much pressure and we acted poorly, but we never stopped loving you. You are my daughter. You have a beautiful home here. You have plenty of room. Leo needs his grandparents. He needs his aunt and uncle. You cannot leave your own flesh and blood standing out in a freezing storm." Brenda began to sob hysterically, placing both of her hands flat against the cold metal gates, as if she could physically push them open. "We always loved you, Lisa," she wailed, leaning heavily into the absolute most toxic manipulation tactic she possessed. "I only pushed you so hard when you were younger because I wanted you to be successful. And look at you now. You are brilliant. You are a massive success. Everything I did to make you strong. Please forgive us. I am an old woman. Do not leave your mother out in the cold. I will do whatever you want. I will apologize to you every single day. Just open the gate." Madison chimed in, weeping loudly. "Lisa, I am so sorry for what I said. I was just jealous of you. I was always jealous of how smart you were. We have absolutely nothing left. My credit cards are frozen. Jamal's career is ruined. The bank took the house. We have not eaten a hot meal in 2 days. Please just let us sleep in your guest house. We will stay out of your way." They stood there in the freezing downpour, a pathetic chorus of broken, desperate people. They used every single weapon in their emotional arsenal. They tried guilt. They tried flattery. They tried to rewrite history, claiming their horrific abuse was actually tough love designed to make me successful. They weaponized my son, claiming a 6-year-old boy somehow needed the toxic presence of the people who had tried to kidnap him through the legal system. They were completely bankrupt in every sense of the word, entirely stripped of their money, their status, and their dignity. For 3 long minutes, the only sound was the heavy rain hitting the wet pavement and their pathetic, shivering sobs. Then a small red light illuminated on the edge of the security camera above them. The thick speaker on the silver intercom panel crackled with a sharp burst of static. The intercom clicked on. My voice cut through the freezing rain, perfectly calm, crystal clear, and completely detached. "I am going to stop you right there," I said through the heavy external speakers. The sheer volume of my voice made them all flinch. "You are not sorry, Brenda. None of you are actually sorry. You are just wet, cold, and completely out of money." I watched them on the high-definition security monitor inside my warm control room. They looked absolutely pathetic, huddling together against the freezing wind. I leaned closer to the microphone, making sure every single syllable landed with devastating precision. You did not lock me out in a blizzard 6 years ago to make me strong, Brenda. You did it because you cared more about neighborhood gossip than the life of your own pregnant daughter. You forged my signature and stole my college fund to buy a luxury car, and then you had the absolute audacity to accuse me of elder abuse on a public forum. You are a thief and a liar, and now the entire county knows it. I shifted my focus to the camera feed showing my father. You are not a peacemaker, Richard. You are a massive coward. You stood silently in the hallway while I froze, and you silently mortgaged your family home to fund a fraud. You lost your own house because you refused to stand up to your wife. You do not get to play the loving father now that your bank accounts are entirely empty. Madison sobbed louder, covering her face. Madison? I continued, my voice devoid of any sympathy. You are not apologizing for being jealous. You are apologizing because your platinum credit cards are bouncing at cheap motels. You happily wore my winter coat while I shivered on the porch. You laughed when your husband threatened to have my child taken away. You are exactly where you deserve to be. And Jamal? I paused, watching the ruined corporate attorney stare blankly at the metal gate. You tried to steal a 6-year-old boy's trust fund. You weaponized the state child welfare system. You thought you were the smartest man in the room, but your massive, fragile ego led you straight into a $2 million trap. You do not get to beg for mercy now that your own blinding greed has utterly destroyed your life. You claim you want family unity, I said, my voice dropping to a cold, absolute finality. But you only want my money. 6 years ago, I stood on your porch, begging for my life. You watched me through the glass and turned your back. Tonight the roles are perfectly reversed. But unlike you, I am not doing this out of malice. I am doing this to protect my son. I will never allow your absolute toxicity to infect Leo's life. You are a cancer, and I have successfully cut you out permanently. My security team has already dispatched the local police, I informed them. I can hear the sirens approaching from the main highway. They will be arriving at the bottom of this driveway in exactly 2 minutes to arrest all 4 of you for criminal trespassing if you do not leave my property immediately. Do not ever return here. Do not ever contact me again. We are completely done. There was a sharp, mechanical click. I reached out and flipped the heavy breaker switch on my control console. The red light on the external intercom died instantly. The massive wrought iron gates powered down with a deep, echoing thud, engaging the heavy steel deadbolts. Through the camera feed, I watched the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers illuminate the bottom of the hill. The 4 of them turned around, dragging their cheap bags down the wet pavement, walking away into the freezing darkness forever. The next morning was a stark, beautiful contrast to the violent storm of the previous night. The heavy rain clouds had completely cleared, making way for brilliant, warm sunshine that poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my massive kitchen. I stood at the custom marble island, wearing comfortable silk pajamas, flipping golden brown pancakes on a high-end griddle. The kitchen smelled incredible, a rich blend of sweet maple syrup and premium dark roast coffee. Leo was sitting on a tall wooden stool next to me, swinging his legs and laughing out loud as he tried to catch a rogue chocolate chip I tossed in his direction. The house was perfectly warm. It was infinitely safe. It was entirely mine. I poured a fresh cup of coffee and looked out over the sprawling, manicured back lawn. There were no toxic whispers. There were no looming threats of extortion. There was no desperate need to impress people who fundamentally hated me. Jamal, Madison, Brenda, and Richard were completely gone. They were a closed chapter, a dark and distant memory, entirely erased by the bright reality of my present. I had faced the absolute worst of their cruelty and weaponized their own greed against them, dismantling their fake empire without ever compromising my own integrity. I was wealthy beyond their wildest comprehension, not just in liquid assets and commercial real estate, but in absolute peace of mind. I set a warm plate of pancakes in front of my son and kissed the top of his head. He smiled up at me, his eyes bright and completely untouched by the darkness of the people who shared our DNA. We were safe. We were happy. We were entirely free. The story we just concluded offers a profound reflection on the destructive nature of toxic entitlement and the undeniable power of quiet competence. Through Lisa's journey from a vulnerable young mother locked out in the freezing snow to a triumphant self-made powerhouse, we learn that true strength does not require a loud audience or a fabricated image. Jamal, Brenda, and the rest of the family built their entire existence on the illusion of superiority. They weaponized their perceived status to belittle others, believing their arrogance made them untouchable. However, the most critical lesson here is that unchecked greed and ego are inherently self-destructive. Lisa did not have to actively dismantle their lives. She simply stepped aside and allowed their own blinding arrogance to do the heavy lifting. When people operate from a place of malice and entitlement, they eventually construct their own traps, entirely missing the fine print of reality because they are too busy looking down on everyone else. Conversely, Lisa's victory is rooted in emotional detachment and the establishment of ironclad boundaries. She realized that sharing DNA does not obligate you to endure abuse or enable financial ruin. Instead of matching their chaotic, screaming desperation, she responded with cold facts, meticulous preparation, and unyielding limits. She protected her peace, her son, and her future by refusing to be dragged back into their toxic cycle. True peace is found the moment you stop seeking validation from those who are fundamentally committed to misunderstanding and mistreating you. This narrative serves as a stark reminder that we are the sole architects of our own boundaries, and protecting our well-being is an act of necessary survival. Take a hard look at the relationships in your own life and find the courage to permanently walk away from anyone who demands you sacrifice your peace to feed their ego.